Okay, and then point 6. In the section on the IGHP, a brief ethnography, how does Palsson characterize the Inuit elders' view of Southern research, and how does this translate as a view of science? Palsson rightly points out the divided nature of Inuit perspectives of Southern scientific approaches. Having just moved to the Arctic myself, it becomes more and more clear to me with what arrogance a lot of scientific research occurred in the past, and possibly into the present, hopefully not. The mere idea that someone come without any community relations for a very limited time in order to collect a representative sample of anything Inuit seems so far-fetched. The notion of such studyability of Inuit seems almost degrading and clearly calls to memory the days in which Inuit of the Eastern Arctic were assigned identification numbers just like Canadian military dogs. Palsson well addresses the rising awareness of the multiplicity of knowledge, which indicates that the traditional Western scientific approach to accumulating knowledge is but one approach among many equals. A division between Western and Inuit ways of knowledge, or of knowing, is thus becoming as unnatural as is the idea of maintaining a nature versus nurture approach to anthropological research and theory. Practically, the governing bodies of Yukon, Nunavut, and Northwest Territories are attempting to establish increased connectivity between Southern researchers and Northern Aboriginal communities, thereby increasing the degree of potential collaboration and inclusion of multi-stranded ways of knowing. 7. Palsson discusses the nature of collaborative research. What does this look like? In the case of Palsson's Kitikmeot and Greenland-based genomic sampling project, he elaborates on how many permissions had to be obtained before any sampling could take place. The operationalization of Palsson's study in Cambridge Bay took place largely through local representatives. I assume that this made a strong statement about the interest of the Inuit community in this particular study, since it was basically executed by Inuit on the ground. This is one good way to facilitate collaborative studies. But at the same time, the danger, I think, does exist that Inuit co-workers are merely viewed as necessary ingredients or useful Sherpa for the process of acquiring information that is most useful to the interest of non-local scientists. It seems that Palsson was lucky in the case of his IGHP study to quote one of his commentators to his paper, because according to them, it is nothing but luck that caused the Inuit of Cambridge Bay to be interested and open to his study. What if they had said no, thank you? Yesterday I visited with Paulo Flick, the manager of scientific services at Aurora Research Institute here in Nunavut, to discuss the technicalities of applying for a research license for the Northwest Territories. Practically, one applies with the institute, which then sends out the request and summary of the project to various Aboriginal communities, associations, organizations, and at the same time the researcher is responsible to build a good relationship with the community itself, which is going to be under study, and to facilitate potential collaboration in the research. After such a researcher-community relationship has been successfully established, and after various boards and associations have reviewed and the request and granted their approval, the license can then be granted. Generally, it takes between 3 and 6 months for the paperwork to clear and come back. Building good relations with the community may, of course, take a lot longer, I think, especially here or probably anywhere in the Arctic. Okay, 8. How does consent factor into this debate? Consent is complicated. It has always been complicated, but in the Arctic, and especially at the intersection of indigenous and non-indigenous peoples, it becomes a lot more complicated, I think. According to Palsson, we now have to deal with multiple ideas about society, one being the Western individualistic approach, the other being the communitarian and more indigenous approach. Does one obtain consent from the community only and then do the research among individuals who belong to this community? Or does one obtain individual consent and consequently ignore the fact that each individual is tightly tied into a communal identity, which is strongly affected by research done on an individual? In the North, the question actually becomes more complicated yet, because Aboriginal people are experiencing such a generational gap, which is laden with differences in self-definition, especially between the young and the old. So while some of the elderly people may have a stronger sense of a communitarian identity, the younger may subscribe to more of a Western individually driven identity. So it remains complicated at best.